artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello and welcome to episode 200. Boy, when I started this thing, I may not have had any plan on stopping it, but I certainly didn't either think about where it would be in 200 episodes, which is sort of an embarrassing thing for a futurist to say. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity to grow and get better at this. And thank you to all our guests who gave so much of their time and intellect to help me and all of you get to grips with this AI thing more effectively. I hear from more and more of you now about how the show is making a difference for you, and that means a lot to me. On with the next 100 episodes. We are talking with Jerome C. Glenn, the co-founder and CEO of the Millennium Project on global futures research. He has over 50 years of futures research experience working for governments, international organizations, and private industry, and has addressed or keynoted conferences for over 300 government departments, universities, NGOs, UN organizations, and/or corporations around the world. He was the Washington, D.C. representative for the United Nations University as executive director of their American Council from 1988 to 2007, and was instrumental in naming the first Space Shuttle the Enterprise, banning the first space weapon, the Fractional Orbital Bombardment System, in SALT II. Saturday Review named him among the most unusually gifted leaders of America for his pioneering work in tropical medicine, future-oriented education, and participatory decision-making systems in 1974. He invented concepts such as conscious technology, trans-institutions, telenations, management by understanding, and more, and coined the term futuring in 1973, and is currently working on the initial conditions, rules, and guardrails for Artificial General Intelligence, that's AGI, for the IEEE. He's on the show talking about the beneficial AGI conference that he recently co-organized in Panama City. Last week, we talked about some of his recent work with groups of the United Nations General Assembly and about his decentralized approach to grassroots empowerment in both implementing AGI and working together to regulate it, that were at a holistic level that made me draw comparisons with Buckminster Fuller. Back to the interview with Jerome C. Glenn. You've been talking about the urgency here, and that's quite evident from your presentation. You get the sense of feeling like you're running ahead of a pack of animals chasing after you. Which animal is in the lead there? What's the biggest driver of this urgency?
Well, the biggest driver of the urgency, I would say, is how the forecasts of when AGI would arrive has dramatically shifted over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, it's decades. Mm-hmm. Now we're looking at years. Now, of course, people can change the definition, as you point out. Definition can move all over the place, but some people think that there's some AGI in some labs being trained right now. Who knows? Hopefully they don't release them onto the internet ahead of time. And by the way, again, on our website, very soon, but I get done within a week or so, we'll have a second phase of the study available, which rates 40 regulations. Because most of the things you read today are nice, good statements, but you want to say how after each sentence. Good. How? Our second phase is how. Here's 40 hows, and then 5 regulatory systems. I mean, the bodies is how they would get done. And then we also collected comments on all of these regulations and on all of these models together. And we're just finishing editing and my lousy typing getting corrected and so forth. And that hopefully will be available in a few weeks from the web.
So the timing arises from AGI being more imminent than it has appeared in the past. But what is the effect of that? What does that look like in terms of effects that you want to avoid or encourage?
You mean if we don't have rules in place?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a terrible statement to make, but I think that if we don't have our rules in place before it arrives, arriving means going on the internet for sale. I mean, it's actually a thing. If we don't shape that in some collaborative way and some rules for this, rules of the road for it, then they're all rogue AGIs. And the idea that none of those rogue AGIs will evolve into superintelligence that are not destructive, I think is naive. I mean, it seems to me it's inevitable that there'll be a variety of superintelligences. And with a variety of means that there can be real collisions. So we want to avoid that. This is serious business. And this was not gotten home to a lot of people. This is not an academic exercise. This is the real McCoy. It's like during the nuclear, I mean, many historians used to say, if two or more great powers confront each other, they use the weapons of the day and they invent some along the way. Okay, by that definition, we should not have been on this radio show together. We should have been dead by nuclear war. The Soviet Union and the United States. Well, it didn't happen. Why? Because we both sides said, okay, you can keep your stuff secret, but let's figure out how do we manage it together. And we did that. And we contained it. It didn't get out of control. That was a historic change, a reason to be optimistic. Maybe humans can be rational sometimes. Well, this is the same deal. The trouble is, people understand a bomb being big. They don't understand an AGI being big. It's more abstract to people. So people like yourself and others, we have a responsibility to educate people fast about this.
And part of the problem there is, as you say, it's abstract. You can understand what a bomb going off does. We've seen it. But with AI, with artificial superintelligence, people don't know, are we talking about Terminators? Are we talking about something destroying humanity through viruses, acquiring goals like the Earth would be better off without the human beings and things like that? And the general responses are, well, that might be it, but there's all kinds of other things, and we don't want to go into the details of that because it could exceed our imagination in any case. While I get that argument, it leaves people trying to deal with abstractions that I think are not concrete enough for them to wrap their heads around. Even with climate change, we can say, look, ocean level is going to rise. These parts of the country will become uninhabitable. We won't be able to grow things here. Those are understandable, but I don't think we have the same level of specificity when it comes to the danger of superintelligence.
How well have more intelligent species treated lesser intelligent species?
That, again, is an argument we've heard, and it resonates. It makes sense. It is still not concrete. And I don't know if anyone's going to offer anything concrete other than scenarios that are just possibilities out of an enormous range that we can't comprehend. But is it a problem in trying to recruit allies when we can't make this concrete?
My sense is we have enough allies today who understand this. The issue to me is getting them into the next step. Like, for example, how many people who understand this have ever talked to a member of parliament or Congress or their assembly to say, legislative representative, can I talk to you about what your legislation should look like? The answer is, I don't know anybody that's gotten off their butt to do that. Now, they did, in all fairness, there was 3 hearings in the U.S. Senate. They really talked to a large degree about narrow intelligence, but there was a 4th meeting off the record. Elon Musk and the other folks came us, and that's beginning to get serious. So we're moving that direction. So to me, it's more of that. How do you get a hold of your representatives, whether you're in China or whether you're in the United States or Alaska, it doesn't matter, wherever you are, you understand what this show's talking about. Talk to your local representatives and say, look, this is serious. You got to start writing a draft. You don't be so worried about getting it wrong. Just write a draft to begin with. Start to argue about what should be done. And you can draw on our phase 2. There's 40 examples in there. You can throw one of them out and come up with your own. But we got to start writing drafts now. That, to me, is the target.
And I was going to say, this sort of thing works better when you can point them towards something that's already been done and say, start from there, adopt these principles. So say more about the model that they could recommend as a starting point.
Okay, I'll walk into one that's controversial right off the bat, but I was very pleased. The folks in Panama seemed to agree to this one. This is the country. This would have been, I would have expected some pushback, but none of it, but it was rational. You have to have a licensing system for each country, just like you have a driver's license. and you have to do something to pass the test to get a driver's license. So your AGI should go through a simulation to prove it behaves. That simulation can be created by Deloitte and Touche as an auditor, or it can be created by the country themselves. But it shouldn't be right now, it's just the corporations. Like Google does its own simulation. I'm saying it should be third party. It should be another. And it should be a common one that each of us uses that. And that simulation gets smarter every time it's used continually. So you got to pass, that's got to go through that test and you pass it. All right. Now that AGI also then should have narrow intelligence built in. Why would you do that? It monitors all of the rules. So in the AGI, if the AGI does X, is not right, then it has the ability to pause the AGI. If the AGI is not paused and somehow rewrites its code and gets around it, it alerts the human and alerts the government. In other words, you have the licensing agency of the government is automatic. It's like a real-time, boop, it paused, like a pause the system. If it rewrites its code, gets around that one, there's a link between each country and whatever the multi-stakeholder union body is as well. So you have 4 spots along the way to pause something. And I say pause rather than stop, because imagine you're running a robotic surgery system. You don't want to stop it in the middle of surgery. You might want to pause it so that a human is alerted to say, aha, you got to do this, and then you continue on. So that's an example that you have, everybody's got to have a license. They've got to pass a bunch of rules to prove that they're safe before they get the license. The licensing system has to be certified by the UN agency, because you don't want to have a licensing system for, I give you a license simply because you're my cousin in some countries, right? So you'd have to have a global system. Now, certain countries won't be able to have the capability to put it together. So they simply copy the license of another country's system, because little Dominica that I lived in the Caribbean doesn't have a big budget for this stuff. But they might have one for the CARICOM or some other global system to use it. So there's a little example of some of the rules. You can also have a rule saying you can't rewrite history, or you have to identify every manifestation of being AGI generated. So you can have a lot of different rules like this built in, but then you have narrow intelligence is monitoring it, because it's all too fast for humans to do this. So you need the AI to monitor the AGI.
Mm-hmm. How was that received?
Well, I was pleased. I said that to some people after, like down the bar. I said, that was okay? They said, yeah, what's wrong with that? But see, their objective isn't the rules. Their objective is they don't want to have too much centralized power, concentration of wealth, all that. That's what it is. So they don't mind the rules. They just don't want to have it all controlled by one central player.
Right, but you drew parallels with the airline industry earlier, and so this could be equivalent to rules that enable airplanes to quite successfully travel between continents and land at foreign airports. The recent explosion of development around generative AI and large language models has been driven by organizations that had a humongous amount of money to spend millions of dollars on GPU clusters and then have the prospect of being able to raise billions of dollars in revenue through the exercise of that intelligence. To what extent is one of those animals chasing you the possibility of unbridled, unconstrained, unregulated AI and AGI, in this case, developed by those large commercial entities?
Well, they're racing, as I'm sure your previous guests have made this point. They're racing right now. That's the arms race today. Mm-hmm. And you probably had guests explain this also, is that let's say that the two of us are two corporations racing to do this. And let's say you think that you're more moral than I am. So therefore you figure, well, I'm going to do it right. So I have a responsibility to get there first. So he who's less moral won't get there first and mess things up. And then I might have the same attitude. I might say, well, I'm more ethical than you are, and I want to race like crazy. I have a responsibility to get there first. China might say that about the United States. The United States might say that about, etc. So you got all these players go like, we got to get there first so it doesn't get messed up. Well, but getting there first, you're cutting corners. You're messing around. Are you putting in their narrow intelligence guardrails in there? Probably not. It's a real hard problem. And that's why it keeps speeding up. Keeps speeding up. Keeps speeding up. And of course, the faster we get, as you know, in the computer world, the faster you get, the faster you can get.
Mm-hmm. Recursive self-improvement. Which actually
Right.
reminds me of something else I wanted to mention, because the conference reminded me of something that took place in 2017 in Asilomar,
Yeah.
where the 23 Asilomar principles were developed. And I've always thought they were an excellent starting point and have, for some reason, completely dropped off the radar of people doing this. No one seems to refer to them and say, well, we're going to build off this or cite them. And maybe they suffered from a lack of hows. They said what to do, why to do it, but not how to do it. What's your take?
Well, that's why phase 2 is how to do it. By the way, just very quickly, phase 1 took 55 AGI experts addressing 22 questions.
Mm-hmm.
That put it all on the table. Then having it all on the table, you can sort through it and say, okay, here are the important stuff to assess. That's phase 2. Phase 3 is let me show it to you in scenarios. Here's how it works. Here's how it doesn't work. Matter of fact, the guy, Hanson Robotics, he's going to get this guy on the record. And so he was there at the conference and he was explaining his approach. And I'm saying, hey, there's problems with that approach because organized crime can get the stuff that decentralization too. They love this open source decentralized stuff, man, saving me a budget, right? But he's saying, well, here's how it can work right. Here's how it can work wrong. We were in the hot tub sitting there discussing. I said, look, can you write all this stuff up? So I've invited him to write one of the scenarios. We say, here's how it evolves. Then here's how it goes wrong. And here's how it goes right. And we show the decision maker. Here's the gap between those two. That's why you've got to make decisions today. And we'll do this with other scenarios as well. So that's our next step is the scenarios.
What's your wish list for resources or other help that would make this process go better, go faster?
Well, we did have a little support from, unsolicited, by the way, from the Future of Life Institute. And we got a little bit from the Dubai Future Foundations. And that took care of the first two. The scenario part hasn't been funded yet. So any donors out there are happy to do that. And then we also want to go beyond that, going to have conferences and interact with politicians and all that sort of stuff. Build this stuff home fast.
Are there specific skills that people, if they had them, you would be looking for them to join and contribute their work to what you're doing?
Well, one, if some people have written scenarios, and when I say scenarios, I do not mean what most futurists call scenarios. What most futurists call scenarios is descriptions of a future condition. That's not a scenario. A scenario is a story that connects the present to the future with cause and effect links and decisions that are plausible and exposes what you don't know. Now, if some people have written such, I'd like to learn because like anything else, you want to know everything that's been done before you do the next step. So we'd like one, they can contribute right there. What's the state of scenario? As a matter of fact, with the Chinese embassy yesterday, I said, by the way, I want your scenarios, whatever's not classified. So that's what we're doing now, gathering all the various, that's one. Another skill that we would use very soon is we want to recreate and build back better our global collective intelligence system on the future. We've got an awful lot of stuff in the past that's been done. Long story why that's no longer here. But then we want to do another one. And so people with software skills on making an interactive global collective intelligence system is one of the next steps we want to do so that we can continue. So the study's not static. It's like a continuing, ongoing thing, improving all the time. So the company comes in to see something and say, aha, that's the state of the art. Another one, while you asked, another one was, we were hoping that we're going to get this done with the Inter-Parliamentary Union. This is a union of parliamentary stuff, but I'm not sure they're going to do it yet. We got to do this fast. We want to have an online map of the world, and you can click on any country, and then up would come like a little file, and it would say the current status of their AGI work, so that we would be able to do a report card on AGI readiness. How ready is the world going? Well, that you need something like this map, and then that map could create some peer group pressure for other countries to say, well, my God, Finland already got this. I'm sitting here in the UK, we're supposed to be this hotshot leader, and they're ahead of us on this one thing. We'll go back to their parliament, start to work on it. So the idea is an interactive, state-of-the-art map on artificial general intelligence governance needs to get done.
Wow. I am so taken with the passion and the urgency and the practicality with which you're approaching this. And I want to be more a part of that somehow, which was one of the reasons for asking that question. So as an aside, before we finish here, We were talking before the beginning about futurists and futurism, and you had a reaction to the term futurism. You want to lay that one bare for our listeners?
Sure. Futurism is a school of art that was created about 150 years ago in Milan, Italy. And it robotized a style and worshiped the machine. All things great and glorious was a machine, and everything else is not to be taken too seriously. And that evolved to some degree and taken over intellectually by what became fascist. So I was in Milan just by sheer luck for the 100th anniversary of the futurism movement. I didn't intend to be, but I just walked down the street and there's 100th anniversary 24 years ago. So I met with some of the Milan's advanced group, the Singularity folks and the different chancellors, and say, let's do it again, but this time watch with the fascism stuff. So one, I don't want to be associated with fascism. Two, ism tends to be an ideology. Not always, but tends to be an idea. Like journalism is not necessarily an ideology, but most of them are ideologies. It says this is in and that's out. And if you don't agree, bang, bang. So we don't want to do that. Futurists are trying to open the mind to possibilities. So we don't want to have an ism. We don't want to have an ideology. We want to have an approach. It's just like historians want to know what happened. Journalists want to know what's going on now. Futurists don't know what's happening next, but we can hear the possibilities. So hence we don't want to do futurism, because then it sounds like some sort of a ideology.
Got it. So futurist, okay. Futurism, not okay.
Yeah, and then I'm in a contradictory position, any historian will point out, because the adherents to futurism in Italy were called futurists. So I'm in a contradiction. I like the word futurist, but I don't like the term futurism.
Well, we could go on for so long, but your time is extremely precious right now, and I want to respect that. And you've got something very important coming up right after this call that I don't want to distract you from at all. So anything you want to tell our listeners to wrap up this conversation?
Well, one, go to the website and get phase one. It's a good overview. You want to get into a good, clear overview of all the stuff we've been talking about. One document. It's nice. It's good. And then if you come back in a few weeks, hopefully you can download 2 so you can get a list of all the regulations, how they've been rated by people, and also the comments. This regulation is good, but it can be messed up this way. So it's comments on. So it's not just numbers on a regulation, but also different views on it. How? So this is something good for legislatures to show it. Legislators, because you don't want to do it in a dumb way. You want to do it in a smart, and some of that report will help make on that. Third one is if you got some hot shot scenarios, real scenarios on AGI evolution, we're happy to look. We want to have a good overview of what is before we start to write the next scenarios.
Appreciate it very much. I've got a list of questions still unasked as long as my arm. Hopefully we'll have a chance to get into more of those later. Jerome Glenn, I thank you very much for coming on the show and giving us such a useful and broad perspective on AGI.
Thank you for your work.
That's the end of the interview. What do you think about the licensing proposal for AI? A few years ago, I would have considered it a non-starter, but I can see governments moving in that direction now, and something like this wouldn't surprise me. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, Figure, a California company developing autonomous humanoid robots, announced that it has signed a commercial agreement with BMW to deploy general-purpose robots in automotive manufacturing environments. Now, of course, robots have been used in making cars for decades, going back to the famous Unimate arm in 1961. But Figure's robots are humanoid, which, as they put it, quote, enable the automation of difficult, unsafe, or tedious tasks throughout the manufacturing process, which in turn allows employees to focus on skills and processes that cannot be automated, as well as continuous improvement in production efficiency and safety, end quote. So this presages the introduction of humanoid robots in the workplace. One of the key distinctions here being that you could take them out of the automobile factory and put them somewhere entirely different without changing any of the hardware, but only the programming. My guest next week will be Fiona McAvoy, AI ethics writer, researcher, speaker, and thought leader, and founder of the popular website youthedata.com. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, It's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.